What's going on, everybody? Welcome to In Their 20s. This is your go-to podcast with the best advice. Every single week, we speak with the most successful and influential people about what they did in their 20s. This is your host, Landon Campbell. Before we introduce this week's episode, thank you so much for the love and support and awesome feedback from last week's episode with the legendary Tim Draper. We broke a record for first day listens. I enjoyed all the messages that came in from people that loved the episode, so thank you so much. And we have another special episode and guest to introduce for episode 105 of In Their 20s. We were privileged to speak with Henri Pierre-Jacques, the managing partner and co-founder of Harlem Capital, which is a venture capital firm on a mission to change the face of entrepreneurship by investing in 1,000 diverse founders over 20 years. We spoke about a lot of cool things in this episode. Do you need to sacrifice for success in your 20s? We covered time management in your 20s, and we also spoke about the current venture capital landscape. Before we bring Henri onto the show, here are the top 3 things that 20-somethings should know about. 85% of Gen Z is indifferent about brands focusing on the metaverse. I thought this statistic was so funny because I'm a big believer in the future of the internet, and Web3 has a big role to play in that. The metaverse might have a big role to play in that as well. But I've truthfully been pretty turned off over the past year and a half, seeing a lot of these large legacy companies attaching themselves to the metaverse when it doesn't make sense. I'm not going to name any companies on the show today, but we all have seen examples of this, and it's very reminiscent of early 2000s when a lot of these companies would just attach a .com to their name, and a lot of people had to question, okay, like, does this company necessarily need to be on the internet? Same with today. Yes, metaverse, it's cool. Virtual worlds, very cool for a lot of utilities. You know, it solves a lot of and addresses a lot of issues on the internet. But I've just seen so many examples of companies, again, trying to have a presence in the metaverse when it doesn't make sense. So here's my answer to you, companies. Again, 85% of us, and maybe even more, we don't care whether or not you're focusing on the metaverse, especially when it's theatrical, artificial, when it doesn't make sense. So really be intentional if you want to be involved in Web3 and quote unquote virtual worlds, because right now, apparently our universal response to a lot of these brands setting up shop in the metaverse is just a shrug emoji. For the second point on the list, Amazon Prime and Grubhub announce a collaboration and partnership. This is really, really interesting news. Amazon Prime members in the United States can now get free meal deliveries through Grubhub for 1 full year. And this means that Amazon also has the option to take up a 2% stake in Grubhub. Amazon is a monster. Really, they've diversified in such a great way, attaching themselves also to other companies, really intelligent when it comes to the acquisitions they make. And I'm watching closely to the, DoorDashes, Uber Eats, a lot of these other companies, delivery companies, to see how they react to this, because I think Amazon Prime and Grubhub can win for sure. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens. Final point on our list today, we have more drama with Twitter and Elon Musk. Elon just told Twitter he wants out of the deal to buy it. To remind everybody, he had placed a $44 billion with a B deal to buy Twitter months ago, and Twitter says it's going to force him to still close out the sale. So more drama, more trauma. We're going to see what happens here. But as you know, Elon has been very vocal about his concerns with bots on Twitter. Twitter estimated that bots accounted for only 5% or less of its users. Elon says that this is not true. Twitter's not being transparent. There are way more bots on the platform, and that's come from his own team investigating it. In a Friday tweet, July 8th, Twitter chairman Brett Taylor, who also is the co-CEO of Amazon, said the company, Twitter, is committed to closing the transaction on the price and terms agreed on by Elon Musk and plans to pursue legal action to enforce the merger agreement. So if you think the situation is over, it is not, but this is a huge development that I am paying close attention to. All right, everybody, those are the top 3 things that all 20-somethings should know about. All right, everybody, we're going to dive in with Henri Pierre-Jacques to talk about his best advice for people in their 20s. Before we do, one more reminder, if you have a Gen Z founder in mind that is building in the creator economy, gig economy, or Web3, please DM me at Landon20s, DON20S. I would love to learn more about that founder and have a really unique opportunity for said founder. All right, let's dive in with Henri. We can go ahead and get started at the beginning. I want to talk about your days at Northwestern. I understand that you were really involved on campus. Of course, you then went to Harvard for business school, but what's a daily routine that you developed during those undergrad and graduate days that you can still confidently say you use today?
Yeah, I mean, the routine in college is definitely very different from the routine in your late 20s or early 30s. I mean, I always was a night owl. So, like, I definitely would go to the library super late. I was more like a 9 p.m. to 2, 3 a.m. kind of person.
Mhm.
And, I would say I'm not a morning person. So I would never, like, I tried my absolute best to never have class before 10 a.m. And I was pretty good at that, particularly as I got to like junior and senior year. And I would largely try to like, as I got older, it's harder your freshman, sophomore year to kind of like stack your classes on certain days. But as you get to your junior and senior year, I graduated 2 semesters early my senior year. So I was done in December because we were on a quarter system or trimester system. You try to stack your classes where you only have them on, 3 days or 4 days max,
Mhm.
which I also did in business school as well. My second year, I only had business school classes Monday to Wednesday. So that was really helpful just because like it gave you space, it gave you a longer weekend. Where I took my GMAT while I was in undergrad as well. So I could kind of say, hey, I'm going to focus on school these days and focus on my GMAT these days. So I like to create that space. I've done that today as well. Like I only take calls Tuesday to Thursday. I don't take calls Monday, Friday. Like those are like my internal kind of reflective time. And
Mhm.
or if I'm going to meet people in person, I meet people in person on Monday and Fridays. So I think having like that gap and that breakage is just really important. Otherwise, it's kind of like you're hopping back and forth between stuff all the time and you never really have time to like reflect or take time off. So that's something that's probably saved me, over the last decade.
Yeah, no, it's really cool to hear that you mastered time blocking and time management. That's something that a lot of young people need to get better with, myself included. Something that I've noticed my daily routine is more efficient, when I'm able to really know going into the day, I want to do this and that, versus, having these things get thrown all over the place and unexpected calls come, etc. So you just spoke about this, internal reflection, and that's something that I really think you do so well in a public light. I mean, a lot of people would only say that you can, build in public if you're a founder, but I love how you're constantly sharing your experiences, your conversations with founders, and pretty much, everything that you're thinking about internally. It's
Pretty
nice
much.
because, yeah, I'm a big believer in order to become successful, you need to see success. And of course, it's difficult sometimes for us, people that look like us, to find certain mentors and people that do look like us killing it. So I think that it's amazing to see how public you are. And on the subject of being public, you have been reflecting a lot about, this time as you enter into the 30s, tweeting a few weeks ago that the 20s were about building, and you kind of developed this work hard, play hard mentality. I'd love to kind of hear more about that and understand how did you use your 20s to the best of your ability, and what were some, of the pros of your 20s, but also some of the things that you maybe wanted to get rid of, and things that you would say people currently in their 20s shouldn't focus on.
Yeah, I'm hitting 2 points. I'll hit the first point on like the building in public because I think, the prior generation, whether let's say you're above 50, 55, didn't have the luxury to build in public. And whether it's, you look at a LinkedIn profile picture, there's no picture. Oftentimes, like that's a person of color, right? Like they kind of want to like have this anonymity about like who they are for their companies. And, it's unfortunate, but that was the reality of the last, 30, 40 years. So I think we are at a place like where we have a privilege where we can build in public. That wasn't the case for our parents or for our grandparents. And so I don't take that lightly. And it's not for everybody. Building in public has its pros and cons. It can be time consuming if you do mess up or fail. Like there's a bigger fall because there's more people who know who you are. So there's pros and cons to it. But I think for us as a firm, we've built a culture where like we do believe you can't be what you can't see. To your point, I think we also were very privileged to do programs like MLT and SEO. And I worked at a Black-owned private equity firm, and so like Willie Woods, the founder, was like one of my role models. And like the majority of people of color like aren't going to be in those programs, aren't going to work for a Black-owned private equity firm, so don't get to have those mentors. And so I'm not like a big proponent on having one-to-one mentorship. It's not scalable. But I think as long as I can at least be visible and like share whatever nuggets I have, at least some people can see it, even if I can't mentor them, so to speak. Then when I think about the second part of the question, the 20s, I mean, my philosophy in life has always been work hard, play harder, which my dad gave me. And I think the 20s, like, it's definitely a grind. Like, I was working 100-hour weeks, like, very easily in investment banking, and 70-hour weeks in private equity. And now I'm probably doing like 50 to 60-hour weeks in venture capital. But like every step kind of got easier and easier. I think early on, what mattered most was like you have to become a master of your craft, as
Mhm.
Robert Smith would say, which like just requires 10,000 hours. You got to put in the effort. And like really, especially if you're in the finance industry, like hard work is kind of table stakes, right? Like it sounds crazy, like, oh, you worked 100 hours. It's like everybody did that, right? It's not like really that unique, right? So it's like you have to put in the hours, and you have to also, create great product, right? And so if you're staying up till 4 a.m., like how do you actually like create great product and not have somebody have to check your work over and over? So it's a double-edged sword because it's not hard to be productive when you're tired. I think the second piece that was really important is like networking. And that partially is for me, right? Because I'm an extrovert, and my greatest strength and for me is networking, right? I
Mhm.
love people. I thrive off of people. It gives me energy. And so I always had to be like, hey, I know how to do the work. I'm not going to be like the best modeler. I won't be the best whatever, but I know how to maintain relationships really well. And so early on, like I took the time to like do coffee chats and go to different groups. And I would meet with people during the day, which, made me and Ham would stay at the office until 3 a.m. versus 2 a.m. because I wasted an hour doing lunch or coffee. And I was fine with that. Right. Or like if I left work at 10 p.m., I would go out with my friends, right, and like get less sleep. But it was like, I value that. I didn't want to leave work at midnight or 10 p.m. and go home and just sleep and then go back to work at 8, 9 a.m. Like that to me wasn't satisfying. Like I actually would rather like lose an hour or 2 hours of sleep to like actually build that relationship with other people outside of the office. That's not for everybody, right? It's a risk reward you have to take, and like some people need more sleep. Like I didn't need as much, and so I think you have to really decide like what do you value, what are your like strengths, and double down on that. Like you don't want to have too many like gaping weaknesses, but I think as long as like you're good at a lot of things, and it's like, hey, like whatever I'm great at, how do I ensure like I can be like the greatest at that I can be, as long as I can maintain being good at everything else. Like that's just my philosophy. Some people, like to focus on their weaknesses. That's just not my view. And for me, my strength is people. And so I really spent a lot of my 20s grooming my relationships, which helped because once we went to fundraise for Harlem Capital, like that's like where people were like, oh, like, do I know this person? Do they reach out to me? Other than ask, like, have they been talking to me? And now it's like, oh, you haven't asked, you want money, you want advice, but it's like you've been there for 3, 4, 5, 6 years before you wanted to do this. Like I know that you actually like value my relationship, and like I'm willing to sacrifice or give you money, as a result.
Of course, you made some wonderful points there. I just want to really synthesize so our listeners can understand fully. This is the time to build the foundation, really build up on those skills. I come across many 20 somethings that are, scared they haven't found their purpose or their passion yet. I think this is the time to, and I had an author on my show a few months ago, Dr. Meg Jay. She wrote this book, The Defining Decade, and she coined it as identity capital. Like this is the time to try multiple things, but then to your point, yeah, sure, zero in on the ones that you're really good at, because you try more things and really see what you're good at versus what you don't like to do, you can really then find your place. But this is the time to build that foundation. And another wonderful point that you made, I think a lot of people, I agree, think that the more they work, they're just automatically going to be more successful and more productive. I'm grinding in my 20s. You obviously grinded in your 20s, but you said something really cool where, if you're working while you're fatigued, you might not be as productive as you would think. So when you are working, no matter what time, for how long, make sure that you are doing things that are productive. And that goes back to your point originally made, time blocking, really knowing what's going into your schedule, things like that are super crucial. So, make sure that the time that you're working, you're being productive.
Yeah, and
And
it's
yeah,
hard, right? Like
yeah,
because when you're in banking, like you don't have the privilege of time blocking, right? You whenever your
yeah.
boss calls you, like it's when you got to do it. And so, I would say like I got good at it end of college. It goes away in banking. It comes back a little bit in private equity. And obviously now as my own boss, like I can determine that, so it's
Mhm.
easier as a founder or as a GP. And so I think you have to like understand that. I think, a negative that, the millennials or the boomers try to put on Gen Z is like, they're not hardworking or whatever it may be. It's like, you're kind of like battling this identity, to your point of like the identity decade, that like people have kind of put onto your generation. And it's like, hey, I don't want to like validate that identity. But at the same time, I think there is like value to saying like, hey, like we don't have to do things that way. And I I was that way. Like I'm a big rebellious against authority. Like I've never liked authority. My parents know it. My old bosses know it, right? And there's a way to be respectful. But like there were certain things like in banking, and you have to, you take that sacrifice, right? Like for
Mhm.
me, I hated wearing dress shoes to the office. I was like, I'm on the subway. I'm walking like from my house in Harlem to the stop, like, and you go to the office at your desk and you're not doing anything, right? It's like, why do I need to wear dress shoes? Why do I
It
need to
makes
wear
no
a
sense.
tie? Why do I need to wear a suit? Like, there's no reason. So like, I wore gym shoes, and like a lot of people, like a lot of the MDs, like like, oh, like, are you going to the gym? I'm like, no, like I'm just walking around the office comfortably in my gym shoes because I want to wear dress shoes in the office. Like we have no clients here, right? Or very similarly, I would go to the gym every day, between like 6 and 8 p.m. In investment banking. And like that just like wasn't a thing, particularly as like a first year analyst, right? And like, yes, like people are gonna view you a certain way, maybe like, oh, like you're not at the desk, there's less space time, you're lazy. But like for me, like that was important, right? And like maybe I lost a couple $1,000s in bonus. You'll never know. Like nobody's gonna ever tell you the reason, right? You kind of psychologically tell yourself these things like if I don't do this, I'm not gonna be the top analyst or I'm not gonna get the bonus I want. And like
Mhm.
in the end, you just don't really know why you don't get the things you get or why you do get the things you get. But I just knew for me it was important. Like I'm an athlete. I love working out, and there would be times like in the gym I would see my bosses, right, like in there, and like you just got to kind of own that, right? But it's super uncomfortable. And I think for me, like it's just been a trait I've had, and for better or for worse, some people will take it as a pro. And I think the people who I respect the most and my mentors, whether it's Willie or some of my bosses from banking, like who knew it was not out of a sign of disrespect, it was a sign of like this is my boundaries. And the people who I didn't respect thought I was disrespecting, right? Like, oh, like who do you think you are to like want to work out between 6 and 8, or like not like want to wear a suit all day? It was, and that's fine, right? Those aren't the people I talk to. Those aren't the people who are invested in Harlem Capital. Those aren't the people I went to for advice. Like it's just a different philosophy. And I think a lot of people, and it's hard for younger generation because it feels like you are building your career and everybody's smarter than you and everybody, is a boss. You want to push back to own your voice, but like you can't do it too much because obviously you are at the bottom of the totem pole. But I do think there is a boundary, there is a level that you have that freedom to do. And I'm a big proponent of that. I tell my team, like, hey, push back on me, tell me what you want. Like, I'm not going to take it as a sign of disrespect, right? And there are people who will, right? And that may like hurt your career trajectory at that company. You may end up leaving because you don't like that boss. Like, I think you have to really focus on like who you are as a person and what you value. And I think if anything, whether it's Gen Z, whether it's COVID, the last like 3-4 years, like have taught anything is like people are like they're over it. People are going to do what they want to do now. They're going to live where they want to live, and they're going to go to companies that they think value their values. And that just wasn't the case, even 5 years ago, let alone for our parents 20, 30 years ago. So I think it's really hard for a lot of older generation to get that. And I went through it, and some people like me, some people didn't. I think that's fine. Like that's life. I think the faster you can get over that, the better you're going to be and the happier you're going to be. So
I love that. That's super powerful. Own your voice. And I think that I don't think it's the thing of you being rude. I think that you're probably just someone that loves to ask the question why, which is really helpful in your career path right now with having Harlem Capital. And I'm kind of the same way. I mean, there are a lot of these things that have just been existed in society and business culture for so long. I love the shoe example, and gemming, like, why am I not allowed to wear running shoes in the office? And sure, yes, I agree with you. If there was a client coming in, I'm ensure that you'd probably have dress shoes on. But if it's just a day in the office, like, why do I have to do everything that everyone else is doing? So I think that it's good to ask why. And I do agree that Gen Z and people my age are really increasing that because there are so many things that we've seen throughout the pandemic. Things just change, and really made us realize that we should ask why a little more often. And it doesn't have to be a rude thing, but I mean, I kind of like to question
yeah,
everything as
they, they,
well.
they may take it that way. So you just got to be prepared.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'd love to dive in now to this amazing thing that you developed while in your 20s, Harlem Capital. Of course, you guys are built within the mission of changing the face of entrepreneurship by investing in 1,000 diverse founders, which will turn into thousands and hopefully, a butterfly effect to impact millions and millions of people. We're going to get into the specifics of the fund. Of course, I want to talk about these 39 plus investments that you've made, but something that you mentioned earlier in your 20s is that you really built a foundation of relationships. Networking is really important to you. So looking at this large announcement that you guys made back in March, raising over $130 million for Fund 2, people probably see something like that and assume that this happened overnight. No, this was you building and cultivating these relationships over years, maybe even close to decades, who you would then go back to ask, to serve as LPs investments in your fund. So what is your advice for people in their 20s looking to build those relationships in a way that isn't transactional?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the first thing, right? It's like it can't be transactional. And we were fortunate that we like Harlem Capital kind of like it didn't just happen, but we weren't looking for it to happen. Right. And so when I say that, Jared and I were in private equity at ICB, we were cube mates. We were like, why don't we start investing our own money into companies, similar to what we were doing at work, right? We were making good money. We were 25 at the time. And so, we just started investing in companies with no intention of diversity, no intention of raising a fund. It was just like, hey, we're making money. We love what we're doing at work. Like, why don't we just do it for ourselves? Right. So we did that, over 2.5, 3 years, put in $250,000 between 6 men. We all met during MLT. We all lived in Harlem. We were all friends, right? And so whatever, $50,000, $70,000 each by like 27, which was a lot of money. It was almost all of our like side money. So I always tell people like we were buying businesses while others were buying bottles. And so that we were doing that just for ourselves. And we get to business school. Jared and I are roommates at HBS, and then we start recruiting. And we worked at a Black-owned private equity firm, ICD Partners. And so I think it's hard when you go from Bank of America, 45-person group, only Black person in the group, and I'm the analyst, so there's nobody above me. I'm the most senior Black person in my group. To Black-owned private equity firm, 5 partners, 4 Black, all went to Harvard Business School, all are role models. Willie's from Detroit, I'm from Detroit, right? So I can see it. Then, okay, I'm going to go to business school, and we've been doing Harlem Capital on the side for fun as an angel syndicate. Now it's like, go to business school. Okay, I'm going to recruit again to be the only Black person as an associate at an all-white venture capital firm. Like, to me, it was like, I'm not going back to that. Right. Like, I don't want that anymore because I know what exists. Right. And so that's when it was like, oh, like, okay, well, we've been doing this. We didn't really plan on raising a fund, but we've like deployed a lot of money. We built a brand at that point. We got some articles. Some of our companies have raised some future rounds. Mm-hmm. So it was like, oh, well, why don't we just like raise a fund? Right. Like we didn't like really know what that meant. We're like, why don't we raise a fund? We think we would rather be our own bosses than go work for somebody else. Right. And so then that's when it happened. Then we raised the first fund during business school and 6 months after we graduated. So I think we were fortunate that like we were doing what we love. So like we didn't need to force anything because we just love investing. We always have. And we also love each other as friends. And so like it was just fun. We would meet in Jared's living room every other week, right, in Harlem, and just like hang out and talk shop. And then we would talk to founders. Like we enjoyed that process. You can't force that. It's like not something that will last you a long time. I think the best people, whether it's the Warren Buffetts, the Henri Pierre-Jacques, like they love this. They're 80, 70, still doing it, even though they're billionaires, right? So I think it has to be a passion for you. And I think secondly, because of like who we are, when we were doing the angel investing, we were building the brand. Like we didn't want to raise a fund, but we still wanted to be the best, right? And so like we still like took notes on every call, like even though like it was for us, right? We still did memos, like even though it was for us, because we wanted to process. Because like though we weren't, now we manage 174 million, then we were managing $250,000. Like that $250,000 was like our $250,000. Like so it was a lot of money for us, and so like we still wanted to like institutionalize and professionalize. Like okay, cool. If we're gonna like if I'm gonna write a 5K check or a 10K check to Blavity, personally, like why am I doing that? Right. So I think having that, and then when we went out to raise the fund, it wasn't like, oh, like here's my track record, and they're like, oh, why did you invest in that company? And you tell it, it's like, oh, cool, like here's the memo, right? Like you can look at it, like here, like so like that really helped a lot. And then as we were building the brand, like we wanted to build a brand because we knew, okay, if we can write 25K checks, which was a lot of money for us, but if somebody, if Blavity's raising a $3 million round, like that's nothing, right? And so it's like, how do you convince Morgan to take your $25,000 check, right? Like how do you like, it's okay. Well, one, the first thing is I don't want to get $5,000 checks from 5 black men. So like the first thing is like, let's create a legal entity, which eventually became Harlem Capital LLC. And then let's like bundle our money. So it's one 25K check from Harlem Capital. Now it's like, well, how do I make Harlem Capital not just like 5 young kids pool their money together, but like, oh, like it's actually like, let's like make it seem like it's a fund. Even though we were Angel Syndicate, people thought Harlem Capital was a fund for years, right? And so like that comes like the branding. So like, oh, we should make a website. Oh, like, let's get a business card. Let's get a logo. let's do a photo shoot. Let's talk on panels. Right. And so it's like we built that because we wanted to get access to the best deals, even if it was only our money. And we knew that if we had a brand that we could get access, and people like, oh yeah, like I, 25K, it's small, but like I saw you guys, I like your brand, like I want you guys with me. Right. And so I think because we wanted excellence ourselves, and like we're like, if we're gonna invest $25,000 in the company, is like, I don't want to invest in like the person who just like wants 25K from nobody. Like
Mm-hmm.
I want it to like be hard to get in. I want to like actually have a chance to make my money back and be in companies that I think are going to change the world. Right. Then you fast forward 3 years later, and now we go out to market to fundraise, and it's like, oh, like, yeah, I've seen you guys too. Like, you guys have been in the market. Aren't you guys, is this your second fund? Like, no, this is our first fund. We were just an angel syndicate. We built a brand. Like, right. So like, it wasn't like, we didn't like methodically do these steps. So I think we were pretty like fortunate we were doing these things along the way without even knowing someday we would start a fund. Like that wasn't our goal, right? And a lot of people do have the goal of starting a fund. And so it's like, hey, if you have that goal, figure out like what are the interim steps you need to take to get there. But like for us, like it wasn't like this like planned out timeline. It kind of was like at some point we got to business school and we were like, we don't want to work for white people anymore. So we need to raise our own fund because, this was we started business school 2017. So this is 5 years ago, 3.5 years before George Floyd happened. Like nobody was talking about diversity investing. Like it was a gender investing lens. There were like maybe 4 or 5 funds who invested based on race. And we're like, this is what we want to do. We want to work for Black people and we want to invest in people of color. There's nobody else, like there's no option. So like, what are we gonna do? We got to start our own fund. So it kind of was like at that moment, luckily we had done all those things for 4 years, but like, it wasn't the plan. It was like that moment of like reflection, which we said, okay, like if we actually look back at the history of what we've done, yeah, like we can raise a fund, like let's go for it.
Yeah, no, it's really clear that there's a cause and effect to everything. And I just want to say right now, branding wise, you guys do an amazing job. I kind of play a lot within the intersection of venture and media, and I interact with a lot of different VCs. And when I really think about it and consider it, I just love to see what you guys are doing online. And I can clearly see how well it serves as a pipeline to the top companies because there are a lot of other firms investing heavily into media. And sometimes, it's not really that intentional. They're just creating media. If they get deal flow from it, if they get to source opportunities from it, screw it. That's a nice, effect that comes with it. But I can tell that you guys really prioritize that. And also the junior members of your team as well in such an awesome, unique way where I'm actually being educated and learning from the content that you guys are sharing. It's authentic, it's genuine. And I am not the only one that thinks that. There are also so many founders that end up knocking on your door because of that. So I think that's an awesome effect. I have a super quick pivot question because it's been super awesome to see the continued success, especially that success that you had in your 20s in building Harlem Capital. And I've had a lot of successful people on my show, the Steve Wozniaks, David Sachs, Ev Williams. And something that my audience has been really curious about is, if you want to have a successful life in your 20s, does that mean you have to sacrifice other things, like starting a family, getting married, et cetera? I know that you ended up marrying your best friend in your 20s and someone who, you've loved and, are able to obviously, grow with. So I'd love for you to kind of set our audience straight. How have you been able to do it? Find success, but also balance both professional life and your personal life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because I feel like, and I just tweeted this today, right? Like the word or the phrase everybody's chasing is a work-life balance. Right. I think it's tough. I've heard different phrases, work-life harmony,
Yep.
like work and life. I think it's easier for me now because like work is my life, right? It is my company, it is what my passion is. And so I don't view that like the two really aren't separate. Right. And when you're an employee, that's very different. You have to kind of separate it because your boss doesn't care about your personal life. You have to be the one to like do that.
Mhm.
So I think it depends on like what phase you are, and I think an employee versus a founder is like two kind of different paths, right? And so I think really what matters is like you're gonna have to sacrifice something if you want to be excellent at anything, period. Right. And so I would say for a lot of people, like work is an avenue for helping the world in some extent and then making money, right? I have plenty of friends, even who are at like the big tech companies who work 40, 50 hours a week. And like when they leave the office, like that's it. And that's fine, right? And that for them is work-life harmony and they enjoy that. It provides them like learning and provides them money to do what they want to do. I think for others, like if you're obsessed with what you're doing, right? And you want to work 50, 60, 70 hours, like or like I would say finance because that's what I know. Like you cannot be good at finance and work 40-hour weeks. It just doesn't, like, I don't, I think anybody who tells you that is just lying,
Sure.
right? Like you can't be in high finance, where it's super transparent, super competitive, right? Like even if you're really, really smart and you're a super genius, like you're gonna have to work hard. Like whether that's 60 hours or 100 hours, like that depends on like who you are, what you're trying to do, right?
Mhm.
But I know for a fact it ain't gonna be 40 hours a week, right? And so the question becomes, okay, if I'm not working 40 hours, I'm working 60 or 50, like where is that 10 and 20 getting removed from, right? Assuming that you want to work 40 hours a week. And so I think that's like really the question is like, hey, like I know what allocation I have, and then it just comes out and it's like, where am I allocating that? And so I think it's just intentionality, right? For me, it's calendar blocking. I'm obsessed with calendar blocking. I know exactly like what my workouts are every day. Like tonight's Tuesday, I have run club at 7 o'clock, right? Tomorrow is Wednesday, I have tennis. Like I know exactly what I'm doing every day. So I think one, for me, consistency makes
Mhm.
me not have to think about things. It's not even a question, right? And then like I know like, hey, every day my assistant knows the schedule calls 11 to 12, 1 to 4. Like 12 to 1 is a lunch break. The morning time is for me. And after 4 o'clock, unless it's an internal team call, like I don't want to talk to anybody externally. But it's like catching up on emails, whatever it may be. Right. And so time blocking for me, like removes the decision. It's similar to like the Zuckerberg, scenario where he wears the same gray shirt every day. Like he's like, I don't care about it. Like it just makes me I just want to focus on my job. Right. So everybody has to figure out like what that like is for them in terms of like creating that routine. And then I think the second thing is you have to integrate whatever's important for you. Right. So like for me, like, I don't have kids yet, but for my wife, it's like if I travel a lot, and I'm obviously fortunate that like she also is an executive coach, so she can travel with me. Very different if she, worked at a manufacturing place and she couldn't travel. Right. And so you have to have that conversation. And we did, because she quit Deloitte the week after we got married. Right. Because Deloitte, you had to be wherever they wanted you Monday to Thursday. Right. And so like basically now it's like you have two working professionals. She's traveling Monday to Thursday. I'm traveling. Sometimes I'm gone on the weekends for work because I'm extending a trip. Right. So it just doesn't, it's not going to fit. Right. And so you got to have that conversation like, hey, like what's going to make it where like we can both like go to these places together. Like I was in New York for all of June, partially for work, partially for fun. And she came and she worked in New York the whole month too. Right. But it's like if I'm going to New York for a whole month and she's in Miami or wherever, like, yeah, I mean, your work life balance for June is done. Like you have no balance. Right. And so I think it's like when you have a partner, once you start having kids, like the levels just start to get even higher and higher, because it's not just like work life balance for yourself, like it's for like others
Mhm.
who also are committing to you. And so you have that, it's a constant communication, it's constant reprioritizing, like, hey, what's important for us, right? For us this year, it's like we want to travel a lot because we know once you have kids, that's not the case, right? And so you got to figure out like, hey, what phase of life are you in? It's not going to always be perfect. It shouldn't. Like compromise always has some sacrifice. But I think the like the phrase work life balance, or like, do I need to sacrifice? Like, you don't need to. But like, I think most people. I don't talk to many people who don't want to. I think that's the difference. It's like if you want to be great, like you want to sacrifice. Like it makes it that much better. You're
Mhm.
competing. You're getting better and learning. I think the question just becomes like, hey, like even though I want to sacrifice, like what don't I want to sacrifice? Right. So for business school, for me, sacrifice was, second year, I had class Monday to Wednesday, and I was in New York every Wednesday night on Amtrak to Sunday. Like pretty much 3 out of 4 weeks. Like there'd be 1 week a month I would stay in Boston and hang out with my friends. But like besides that, like I had to choose classes that were only Monday to Wednesday. So I didn't take all classes I wanted to take. Right. I had classes that I hated because I was like, I had to take Monday to Wednesday classes. Right. I didn't go on spring break because spring break I was in New York fundraising with Jared, because that was March. We were graduating in May. We need to raise money so we can walk to the stage. Right. And so yeah, it's a sacrifice. I wasn't hanging out with my friends as much as I wanted to. I wasn't going on spring break, the final, trip of the year for business school. But like I was doing what I wanted. I was raising money with Jared, and like that was my sacrifice. Right. And so you have to kind of weigh that pro and con. Some people won't take that. They would say, hey, I want to enjoy the experience and I'm spending $250,000 in business school. I want to get as much out of it as possible. And that's your decision. Right. And so I don't think there's any right or wrong way. I think it just comes down to like you figuring out what your prioritizations are and then sacrificing, because you're going to sacrifice something. The question is just, what are you sacrificing?
Yeah, wonderful points there. It's hard to find success without a little sacrifice. So thank you so much for breaking that down. I want to be very respectful of your schedule because we are going a little bit over, but is there any lasting advice that you have for people in their 20s or individuals looking to break into VC, or people who are currently in VC looking to kind of really build up their career?
I mean, if you're looking to break into VC, you should definitely follow Nicole on
Yep.
Twitter, one of our senior associates, because she's probably the best at that. You know, it's funny when people ask us, the partners, like we never worked in venture, so I don't actually know what it means to like recruit and
Yep.
do the interview process. So I definitely appreciate the juniors on our team because they've actually done it. Um, and yeah, I think I think the only other advice is similar to what I've mentioned before. It's just like really once you figure out like what your pillars are of life, right? For me, that's God, family, Harlem Capital, travel, and like personal health, right? Those are like my 5 pillars. And every year, whenever I do like my like, what are my 2022 goals of the year? It's basically goals underneath my 5 pillars, right? And I can look back. I have a notes document from 2013 of like my 5 pillar goals for the last 10 years.
That's amazing.
Right. Once you have that, like life becomes pretty simple, right? Like, yes, you may have a crappy boss. Like, yes, you're going to have, things happen in life, whether it's COVID or you're going to lose people, right? You're going to have times of pain. You're going to have bad seasons. But in terms of things you can control, life becomes simpler, right? And so the FOMO goes away. The stress of like, what am I sacrificing? The balance goes away. And that's hard to get. It's not easy. Unfortunately, I found it early because one, you have to know what your 5 pillars are. That's not going to be clear to you always in your 20s, not even in your 30s for some people, right? And then once you have those pillars, it's like, can you create the space to actually like execute on them? But I definitely recommend like people figure out like, hey, like what are those core pillars in my life, right? And what are the things that I value? And if you're doing your goals every year around those pillars, like, and you check in with yourself, your 6 month mark, which was 6 days ago, and your annual mark, you'll know kind of like, hey, am I actually doing what I say like is important for me? And that's important, right? And the email inbox is what other people's priorities are for you. They're not your priorities. So like, I don't feel any guilt deleting the emails or responding to people and saying I'm not available. Like those aren't my priorities.
Yep.
Right. And the world will tell you like, oh, like that's just rude. Yeah. And that's fine. Everybody's got their view. That like, do you, I'm gonna do me. I just think a lot of people feel shame for that. A lot of people feel like they have to do things a certain way, or if people like view them or say things about them, or like, oh, you didn't respond to me, you think like, whatever this, like, it is what it is, right? Like people have kids, people have wives, people have husbands. Like there's like, you just got to create boundaries. I think the earlier you can accept that, the easier life becomes. And a lot of my best founders have a very similar mentality, and they're super methodical about holding to what's important to them. Like I was on the call with one of my founders 2 days ago, and he's like, oh, like, I'll call you back in 30 minutes. We're putting the kids to sleep. Right. And he sent me a picture like in bed with his kids, like that, like that's his space. That's his time. Right. It doesn't matter what's going on. Like that's what he's going to do. Right. And those are people I personally respect. I don't need somebody to say yes. I don't need somebody to reply to all my emails. Like that, it's just, there's a lot of stuff going on in this world, enough in our own lives, let alone all the external crap happening in this world, that you have to give people grace. And you have to understand that, like, a post I did today on LinkedIn was, nobody has an obligation to you. Like, I have no obligation to respond to your email. You have no obligation to respond to my email. Like, it's just, if we're friends, if there's whatever reason, if we find value add from it, then like one of us will probably respond. But like, there's no obligation. I think the earlier people can realize, like, nobody has an obligation. Not even your parents have an obligation to help you. A lot of people don't have their parents to help them. Right. Like, so like, you have to realize, like, it's a world where you have to focus on yourself. And then you got to figure out, okay, who are the people I want to surround myself with? Who are the people I want to help? You can't help everybody, and everybody can't help you. And I think that's really tough when you're in your 20s and you're young, and it feels personal. And the older you get, I talk to my grandfather now, like, it's not personal. Right. I think that years of wisdom and the years of like experience, like, just help to give you more clarity and vision.
Totally. Henri, I love the way you think. I think that I agree with you. A lot of that is exhausting, the more yeses that you say. And yes, you got to make a lot of sacrifices in your 20s, but I love the points that you make on obligation. We're not obligated to do anything. So that's why it's important to learn that young, what's most important to you. And then really, curating your experiences and your schedule based off of that. So I just want to say thank you so much for allowing me to talk.
You're good. You're a good interviewer. Nice.
Yeah.
You're really good at repeating exactly what you heard and like putting it succinctly.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that it gets stuck in people's minds, because you're, saying a lot of important things. And for every single interview, this is probably going to be our 105th or 6th. That it's nice for me. I learn. It's not just all about sharing for other people.
Yeah, of course.
That's one of my pillars, to educate myself as well. So I'm fortunate to speak with people like you and learn a lot. So thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Awesome.